Well, good morning, everyone. And we have more people signing on, but we're going to get things kicked off here. My name is Joe Curtatoni. I'm the president of the Northeast Clean Energy Council. More about me in a second and very little about me. I want to welcome you all on behalf of NEC to our 2022 legislative roundup. But first, I want to offer greetings to all of you here today, gathered on this call. I want to start off by saying, really thanking all of you for the work you do as part of this incredible ecosystem in our organization. We run on the power of our members and partners, as you can imagine. And when we align behind key initiatives, we're really able to move the needle and achieve real progress and have impact. I'm actually still in my first 8 months. I just started my 8th month of my first year here as president of NECEC, and I've loved every moment of it. I came here, as you probably well know, after being mayor of the city of Somerville, the greatest city in the world, for 18 years. But at local government, we're working with allies and stakeholders in an ecosystem aligned by our values that orient us all in our goals and objectives, and a great public administration. We accomplished a lot and became a role model for local government across the nation and even globally. And one of the main reasons we're able to do that is because of that ecosystem. We had 80,000+ activists living in our city. And when I went to the state or the federal government, I didn't have to look over my shoulder climbing that ladder. They were there with me. So I feel that same sense of passion, vested commitment, and experiencing that really similar here at NECEC. We're building the kind of membership that empowers us to get results across the region. So when you hear about the progress we're seeing here in the Northeast, recognize that it's happening because you are putting your weight behind, pushing, and really advocating, activating all the work around these initiatives. I would like to take a second to first thank some of our state partners: Focused Government Affairs in Connecticut, E2 Tech in Maine, Clean Energy New Hampshire, Renewable Energy Vermont, and ACE New York. Thank you very much. And also, an additional thanks goes out to our policy team. They are lean, but they are mean. They get it done. Our Vice President of Policy, Jerry McDermott, is away on a well-earned vacation, but he has been instrumental in leading the change for clean energy during the past legislative session. Greg O'Hadama is the newest member of the policy team. He has me on seniority by a couple of days here in this organization, and he'll be leading the Rhode Island portion of this call. My travel partner, Dan Bosley, the reigning defending champion of Massachusetts clean energy lobbyist, will be covering the Bay State. And finally, and I'd like to emphasize this a little bit more, this is going to be our final policy call with Sean Burke. Sean is going to be leading us to lead the energy storage section of an NECEC member company, Blue Wave. Now, Sean's fingerprints are all over many of the legislative accomplishments we'll be discussing today. I think you would agree he's done tireless and exceptional work here at NECEC on our behalf, and everyone's work. And we're thrilled for him to be taking the next step in his career. And again, he's leaving us some pretty big shoes to fill. So I want to thank him and wish him well. But finally, I also want to put a quick frame around all of the major policy victories and new programs we're going to hear about today. I spend most of my time talking to people about the climate economy. And that's the term we're using, the climate economy. We're no longer talking about just different sectors under the clean energy umbrella or some disparate climate tech ventures. We're talking about the driving force behind the national and international global economies. This encompasses pretty much everything we do, everything we make, and everything we eat as a society. And there's no part of our society that isn't going to be directly impacted by climate response. We are where the next wave of jobs and growth will come from, particularly in the Northeast region. And I cannot stress enough how much it changes the game when the Northeast becomes energy independent. We have that opportunity to be the catalyst of a region that delivers impact locally, regionally, globally. It also represents the opportunity to improve the quality of life, the health and the opportunities presented to people who have been left behind in previous economic booms. The climate economy is going to change people's lives for the better, from Bangor to Brooklyn. And what we're seeing in the sweep of legislative gains that we'll discuss today is the work in which we are all involved in is rapidly becoming the central and animating force in this economy. The world is really turning to us, and our mission here at NECEC is to keep that momentum going. So you're going to hear about a lot of exciting wins over the next couple of hours. Yet, the big picture is where we go from here. We're leading our society into a new era. It's happening here and now, and it's picking up steam. So make sure to give yourselves a pat on the back and get ready for a whole lot more to come. So thank you very much for all your work and partnership and commitment. And now I'm going to turn it over, and I'll be thanking him over and over again. I'm sure you'll join me. Back to Schomburg.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate those opening remarks. And I think it sets the stage quite well for our discussion with the partners that you see on the slide right now, who will all be talking about the significant climate action that our states in the region took this year. So we're going to spend a little over the next hour on these 7 states, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end. So start thinking about that as the presentations go forward. Next slide, please. Before we dive into the individual states, I wanted to show the legislative scorecard that we used to pull together and are pulling together now for the first time in a few years, that I think really does showcase the breadth and depth of action that our states took this year, and really applaud the work of NECEC staff and our partners in helping to push all of this forward. But I think at this point, you've heard enough from me. So I will stop, and I'll turn it to our first presenter, Ross Gianfrido from Focus Government Affairs in Connecticut. Ross, take it away.
Thanks, Sean. Morning, everyone. Ross Gianfrido here alongside Mike Martone, Focus Government Affairs, contract lobbyist for Northeast Clean Energy Council in Connecticut. Overall, as you can see from the scorecard, we had a pretty good year in Connecticut. A lot of green, no red, only one yellow. A lot of our priorities passed this year, which I'll get to in a moment. The Connecticut session was largely virtual through at least the public hearing and committee process, the first part of the session, which made it a little bit tricky to get in front of legislators at times. But that being said, despite over Zoom, I think we had a great Clean Energy Day back on March 15th. Many of you in attendance were part of it. We got a good half hour with the governor, and then a good hour with the Deep Commissioner, the PURA chair, and the Connecticut Green Bank president. We also met with a number of Energy Committee members, met with the chair of the Transportation Committee, which was the genesis for Connecticut's Clean Air Act. And we also had a good discussion with the House Majority Leader. And it sure seems like our messaging was well received, as a good amount of the bills that we supported and focused on during the Clean Energy Day were ultimately passed and signed into law. You can go to the next slide. So we'll start with SB 10. This was a governor's bill that would decarbonize the electric sector by 2040. This is a follow-up from Governor Lamont's Executive Order 3 from 2019, which required DEEP to look at strategies to reach zero carbon. The bill essentially just takes that, codifies that executive order into state statute, into state law. SB 176, this is the Shared Clean Energy Facility and Solar Bill. Broadly speaking, it expands the non-residential energy solutions and the SCEF facilities, the SCEF program. Just note that at the beginning stages of the bill, as it was drafted, as it initially came out in committee, it would have allowed EDCs to own SCEFs. But through our efforts and like the 90 some odd other companies that helped to testify against this, including a lot of the member companies, we were able to get that provision taken out. And ultimately that was removed before the bill passed out of committee. So count that as a win. The bill largely, as I said, expands the NRES and the SCEF programs. It increases the yearly amount of capacity in megawatts for the NRES projects from 50 to 100 megawatts, and from SCEF projects from 25 to 50. Raises the aggregate cap from 85 megawatts to 160, and allows those to roll over in subsequent years, which previously it was just capped year to year. It also increases the project size for individual programs, 2 to 5 megawatts for NRES and 4 to 5 for SCEF. And finally, importantly, for the SCEF program, it increases the proportion of the program that must benefit low-income customers and low to moderate income customers. So for the amount of total capacity that must be provided to low-income customers, that number goes from 10% to 20%, and the amount that has to go from low to moderate income customers, it increases that percentage from 10% to 60%. Go to the next slide. So Senate Bill 4, this was Connecticut's Clean Air Act. This bill did a lot. I'll just focus on some of the highlights. Among some other things, the bill allowed DEEP to adopt the California emission standards for medium and heavy duty vehicles, the California truck rule. It also moved up the deadline for electrifying the state fleet. The prior law would have required half of state purchased vehicles to be zero emission by 2030. It moves up this timeline and scales it so that 100% of the state fleet will be zero emission by 2030. The bill expands the Connecticut Hydrogen and Electric Automobile Purchase Rebate or cheaper program. It removes the sunset date for that, so it essentially makes it permanent. It also requires DEEP to prioritize granting these cheaper incentives to residents of environmental justice communities or folks that have household incomes at or below 300% of the federal poverty level, or who participate in a federal assistance program such as SNAP. Finally, the bill also requires that any new construction of state facilities, any new school construction, or projects that are part of the state school construction grant program have to have at least 20% of their parking spaces be, or have 20% of the parking spaces be equipped with electric vehicle chargers. And for the municipal level, the act requires cities and towns to require that any new construction of a commercial or multi-unit residential building with at least 30 parking spaces be equipped with EV charging infrastructure for at least 10% of those parking spaces. Towns can go higher if they want, but at least it has to have a floor of 10% for any new construction. House Bill 5327. So in an otherwise pretty good year, this bill wasn't great. Wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great, which is why I kind of sandwiched it towards the end here. The act allows EDCs to build, own, operate storage. We testified against this bill along with many others, and while it ultimately did pass, I think it's important to note it's just a pilot program at this point. Obviously, we'll keep an eye on it as it moves towards the future. We don't want this to become a nose under the camel's tent situation, but at this point, it's just a pilot program, and certainly could have been worse in its original version. And then I'll quickly touch on the last two bills here. House Bill 5200 establishes a hydrogen power task force to study hydro. They had their first organizational meeting a couple weeks ago. And then House Bill 5202, this is the Millstone bill, or as my colleague Mike likes to say, the shiny new toy for energy in Connecticut, which exempts Millstone from the construction moratorium and allows them to construct an additional building. So that's what I have for Connecticut this year. Like I said, a lot of good stuff. 5327 could have been worse, but wasn't so bad. So hopefully we can keep momentum rolling on this in the next session. But happy to, Sean, I don't know if you have any questions. And then I'll yield my 5 minutes remaining back, so we can keep moving.
Thanks, Ross. I'm sure we will have ample questions at the end, so those 5 minutes are appreciated. Thank you, and thank you for your work this session. I think it was a really productive session in Connecticut. Next up, we have Marty Groman, our partner at E2 Tech in Maine. Marty, take it away.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Ross and Mike, for that coverage. Really interesting stuff going on in Connecticut. I guess I crammed all of the legislation onto one slide, and maybe that's appropriate in that I would say kind of thematically that most of what took place were corrections or trimming around the edges. We do see a strong trend towards asking the Maine PUC to take a role in grid planning, utility accountability, which is particularly tied to, perceived or real issues around our investor-owned utility, Central Maine Power, and just pushing that issue. You can see also some positive news for larger energy storage projects and continued push by the modern wood heat groups to set up combined heat and power programs. And then LD 634 is the one that many of us know as the NEB haircut work there. An effective date, by the way, all of this legislation is actually Monday, August 8th. So that's 90 days after the adjournment of the legislative session. It doesn't mean that a given bill, and 634 is actually a good example, couldn't have other dates in it In fact, that one does. But as far as when these laws are published in the statute books, everything you see here is effective on August 8th. So I would say thematically, what we have going on was a little bit of a reining in, perceived anyway, of the work of the first session of the legislature. Fully the second half of that page is our resolve. So those will generate studies. A sarcastic take would be, I'm sure that there are quite a few wonderful and capable consultants on this call, and there will certainly be quite a few opportunities there. And I also think that the Maine PUC, in fact, I know is very busy. So Maria, if you want to advance to my puzzle slide, this is what I have kind of put together for Maine to think about how things are going for us. If I said that the goal was that lower left piece, the numerous successful projects, I do see positive things. There have been a lot of successful projects that have taken place, and things are moving in a good direction. There are, we hit the guardrail, throw a few sparks every so often, but the puzzle is coming together. There sure is a lot going on, though. In fact, you could argue that I left several things off this puzzle, including energy storage, the concept of beneficial electrification overall, and also our offshore wind work. So we keeping a lot of plate spinning. I also think in the lower right there, the issue of PFAS, or forever chemicals, is not classically an energy issue, but is having a big impact here in Maine. We have a very strong farm economy. This has really hurt. The opportunity for the solar industry to come in as a bit of a savior, if we could do some siting legislation in a well thought out way, is a really pretty big opportunity. But it's difficult to get right, and that actually is what happened at the end of the legislative session, as I see it, where we weren't able to come together on another substantial DG procurement. And a lot of that was about, okay, where would these installations go? And could they go on areas affected by PFAS? And it's a pretty complex sort of scorecard to get right. And it probably never will be entirely right for every situation. But the legislatures need to dig into that, and desire to dig into that, I think, it was what ultimately stalled that legislation. So I would predict that coming into the next legislative session, we will see some more discussion on that, agricultural working groups and so forth. I would also say that Maine is getting a lot of positive press right now for our climate journey. We have the Maine Won't Wait climate plan, and we are. A recent study by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection says basically we're on track. We're on track to meet our goals there. So there's a touch of a victory lap there, saying, okay, it is working. So I am giving you a little positive view of the puzzle. Of course, many things could certainly change. And Maria, if you want to advance to my last slide, I'll just highlight there in the first series of bullets, we do have the Pine Tree Power referendum. I can tell you, I mean, that I'm very certain, really, I would say that will be on the ballot in 15 months, November 23. And if I had to prognosticate to say, I think if it was on the ballot this fall, to be blunt, I think it would pass. So, and I think it very well may pass next fall too. And so that I think that the next legislative session will really be overshadowed to a certain extent by that debate, because the legislators will know that's coming. They'll probably be being drawn into either side of it. It's going to be on the ballot, fairly likely. I'd give it a 80% plus likelihood for a paid leave legislation, which will drive a lot of turnout, and then a special process to require the state to enter into a stronger special process for large debt obligations, which is sort of a way of calling to the voters' attention what the Pine Tree Public Power would effectively do as far as the state's obligation. So I just think the legislators are going to be maybe a little less likely to do bigger stuff on the energy front because they are taking a bit of a wait and see approach on these referendums. And that's really just a gut. But I will say, as I think many know, House Chair Seth Berry, who is a very, very, very effective legislator, now that he is not in the legislature and will be running this Pine Tree Power, I think the gloves will be coming off on both sides. I really do. I guess we'll be seeing plenty of spending on that a year from now. Many stakeholder groups going on, and a lot of good work being done. Just highlighting this in the second bullet, one that I pulled out, but we have the puzzle of getting all of this right, and actually concurrent grid planning processes going on, and we have a ton of work to do. I think there's quite a bit of frustration from what I hear in just the way the processes have been going with interconnection and so forth. So the hope is to produce something that can smooth out some of those processes. And then I continue to think, and I think many do, that we can sort out our differences in the fishery industry and the energy industry as far as offshore wind. We just held at E2 Tech a couple of weeks ago a comparison with what's going on in California versus with their recent leasing versus here in Maine. And it was actually kind of refreshing to hear that Maine has very, very significant offshore wind potential out in, I guess I should say the United States does, because it's out in federal waters. But the hope is we can really get this right, and because it's just a huge potential for the state of Maine. If you, I think the number was, if you could capture all that wind resource, there's 500 gigawatts out there, probably blowing as we speak on such a hot, high demand day. So a huge opportunity for Maine. I think we all need to stay focused on. So I'll just sort of close by highlighting again that some of these grid planning processes are actually already underway. I actually know, for example, that the Versant, which is Northern Maine's utility, is already underway with some modeling. If you're interested in getting involved with that work, get in touch with us and we can make the right connections. There certainly are a lot of opportunities to get involved in the grid planning process here in Maine. And with that, I will pass the baton and look forward to a great discussion coming up.
Great. Thank you, Marty. And speaking of discussion, folks, if you have questions already, feel free to put them in the Q&A. You don't have to holster them until the end. We will start seeing them if you put them in now. But with that, wanted to turn to our very own Dan Bosley for the Massachusetts Roundup report. Dan, take us away.
Thank you very much, Sean. Before I get into the slides, I just want to say, number one, we do have a very small staff at NECEC, but we do try to keep our fingers into what's happening all over the place. We do co-chair the ACES coalition, which is a coalition of coalitions of concerned climate change activists. We have had a successful Clean Energy Day this year, where we met with an awful lot of people in the Massachusetts legislature and tried to direct policy. And then finally, let me just say, before I get into the slides, I have a lot of slides and I am not going to go through every slide. I will talk a little bit about the politics about where these things are, because we're in a little bit different position than some states. But let me say that, our session ends. Massachusetts loves to do omnibus bills. So you're not going to see a whole list of bills that 10 or 20 bills that have passed. It's all jammed into a couple of omnibus bills. And in those omnibus bills, they just got to the governor's desk. And so people have not had a chance to digest everything that's in here. I tried to add as much commentary as I could. As I said, I'm not going to go through it all, but I think since you haven't seen this before, and I know that the slide deck is going to be available for people, I jammed a lot of things in there. And with that, Maria, if I could go to the first, the second slide. House 5151, which is a transportation and climate infrastructure bond. Transportation bond is once in a generation. So about every 10 or 12 years, they'll do a huge transportation bond. This one's 11.3 billion. But this year, if you take a look at this bond, there are things permeating throughout that which deal with infrastructure and deal with climate change, whether it's resiliency and hardening of our infrastructure like culverts and water systems, whether it's solar arrays on our regional transportation buildings. There's a zero emissions truck rebate, and then there's a ton of money in for EV infrastructure. And it's kind of interesting because, you know, you go through the stages of climate change, and first you get denial, then you get anger, then you get acceptance, and then the final stage is logistics. How do we put all of this together? And so we're starting to see that happen. Even in North Adams, if you go into, I was in the Center Street parking lot last night in downtown North Adams, and the first two rows used to be primo parking for Desperados, which is a Mexican restaurant on Eagle Street. If you come to North Adams, go to Desperados, say hi to Pete. The owner of the Mexican restaurant is Pete Oleskowitz. My point is, 2 rows now are taken up for charging stations, and that's happening everywhere. And you're seeing it permeating in all of the different bills that we have before us. This is on the governor's desk. I fully expect the governor to sign it. Next slide. This one is actually law. It's Chapter 102. And again, you can see there's about $500 million of spending. I just wanted to point out the port developments. And the vocational infrastructure is taking and training our ed schools for clean energy jobs. And I think that's extremely important as we go forward into the future. That's all I'm going to spend on that slide. Next slide. Economic development. This bill did not go through. It was a $4 billion bill, which went through the process, is still in committee. We could see it resurface. And the most important thing in here, other than more EV and EV charge infrastructure and improvements to ports, is that there's $125 million in for the Mass Clean Energy Center. The Mass Clean Energy Center is integral to everything that happens here. They have poured a lot of money into making sure that we can advance climate change. We need that money for them to continue to operate. They've done exactly what we have asked them to do. They haven't kept money to build an empire. They have blown that money out into programs, and that programmatic stuff has translated into climate change changes all over the place. So the $125 million is absolutely essential. And then finally on this bill, I think that, you know, there was a question on tax policy. There was $1 billion in tax reductions, permanent tax reductions in this bill. But there was also at the last minute, the realization that there was a law from 1986, which has been used for only once, and it would give a one-time rebate. And I'm hoping that they work that out, or they do something, or they just punt that and get to the actual spending in this bill. I think they will, because there's probably $1 billion in spending for local projects, many of which are solar arrays or charge stations or different things. So I'm hopeful that will go through. And next slide, Maria, thank you. And now we get into House 5060. And if you've noticed in the transportation bond and also in this bill, it's a House number because both of those are sitting in the governor's desk. The governor has taken this bill that was sent to him in a timely fashion. He had time to take a look at it. He sent it back to the legislature with amendments. The legislature, much to their credit, and I have to give a ton of credit to Chairman Roy and Chairman Barrett, the Senate Chair, Chairman Barrett, and the House Chair, Chairman Roy. And also, I should mention the rock star on their staff, Caleb Oakes, is also one of these guys that just works very hard at this. And they took all of this, they researched it, they took some of the governor's amendments as a compromise, they reenacted the bill, and it's now sitting back on his desk. The governor has a couple of options. He can veto it, which we hope he doesn't do. We're encouraging him to sign the bill. And it has a ton of things in here, many of which we've been talking about for years, many of which are brand new that we haven't talked about, but that we need to move forward if we're to hit the roadmap climate goals that we passed last February and we talked about last year. let me just say, advancing solar, there's some things in here that are very, very good. 61A is farm tax policy. Dual use is very important to advancing solar arrays on farms. Exempting the net metering cap for systems up to 25 kW is extremely important. Then let me go to, then we should go to the next slide. No, go the other way. One more. There we go. Offshore wind was a centerpiece on this bill. It advances our offshore wind policy. It gives a $35 million tax incentive. It promotes the working within Massachusetts for putting these things together. So that slide is pretty self-explanatory. We can go to the next slide. It removes the price cap, which is the price cap has been something that's been controversial. Everybody wants a price cap, but it just doesn't work, especially with inflation, with COVID delays. So this removes the price cap. And that was one of the compromises with the governor. And then it addresses conflicts of interest. One of the things that we've heard is utilities shouldn't be making decisions as to awarding bids. DOER, now in consultation with independent sources, will make that final bid decision. Next slide. Grid readiness. One of the problems we have is we can do all of this work if we can't plug in. What good is it? So there is a clean energy transmission working group. They will analyze this. There's a grid modernization advisory council, and utilities have to proactively upgrade their systems with the consultation of that advisory council. And then finally, soliciting bids for transmission as we do offshore wind makes a lot of sense. Let's put this out to bid too and see what's the best price we can get for it. Next slide. Energy storage. We can't do this without energy storage. And there are benchmarks that are recommended for every 5 years. If we come up with a study from the Mass CEC, DOER will go out for bids on 4,800 hours for mid and long duration. We think that's a no-brainer. So this is very important for us to continue to move storage along in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. Green transportation. Let me just say, green transportation has been something that all of these bills have addressed. The sale of ICE, by the way, that's internal combustion engines. So what since the administration policy was to convert all sales by 2035, what the legislature did is they said, look, we can do this, but we need to make sure that dealerships follow these rules. So selling internal combustion engines by 2035 would be deemed an unfair and deceptive practice. And then there are a whole bunch of incentives, including increasing the rebates for electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles. Next slide. Again, charge stations. Okay, let's just stay on this slide for a sec. I've actually talked about this. Oh, public transportation. I think we've all seen. If you take the orange line, well, you can't take the orange line for the next month or so, and that's probably going to increase as we try to maintain the MBTA. So for the MBTA, we have to account for climate change. We've got to be able to try to electrify. We're studying electrification of all our school buses, and then it requires the whole MBTA fleet to be zero emissions by 2040. Next slide. This slide I really didn't put very much on because it's complicated. But in the future of gas, it takes gas out of our CPACE program. It creates a stakeholder group to look at what the future of gas will be and how we can transition over. For large buildings, they are now changing them to energy efficiency and fossil-free fuels is in CPACE. We're assessing schools under large building emissions, again, assessing all of our school buildings to transition them to fossil-free. It increases the plans within Mass Save. It increases the plans for low-income participation. By 2025, no fossil fuel installations through our energy efficiency programs. And there's more energy reporting in both large buildings, and with mass save, utilities have to report on a quarterly basis. And then finally, 10 fossil-free communities that allows 10 cities to require fossil-free construction if they meet their affordable housing goals, and if they have to exempt life sciences and healthcare facilities, because sometimes you still need that Bunsen burner. And then the final slide is just some miscellaneous. I think we all recognize the role that the Mass Clean Energy Center has in, and so it establishes the Clean Energy Investment Fund. Through them, it gives them a whole bunch of duties. Now we just have to get the money to catch up with it. We are concerned about regional energy procurement. We're sitting right in the middle of New England and Massachusetts. We need to be able to take and work with our partners, the other states around us, for energy improvement, obviously for solicitation of transmission bids. And then finally, Green Communities Act. It raises the allowable project cost from 100,000 to 300,000. And then finally, let me just say, I am heartbroken that we're going to lose Sean Burke, but I'm absolutely ecstatic that he's going to make Blue Wave so much better. And I wish him the best of luck. He's been a great partner for our policy team, and I want to say thank you to him before he leaves.
Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate that. And I know we'll continue working together, so you're not getting rid of me. Really appreciate the presentation, and we're right on track with time, so that's great. And let me turn it to Kelly Buchanan at Clean Energy New Hampshire next. Kelly, take it away.
Hi, thanks, Sean. And thanks, Dan, for that really wonderful summary of what's happened in Massachusetts this year. If I could ask for the next slide, please. And I will take you to kind of a different land. Unfortunately, New Hampshire is a much different landscape from time to time than the rest of New England. And we had a challenging session for certain. 2022 started off with a big bang based on something that happened in 2021. The big piece of news from New Hampshire this year was that our energy efficiency programs in November were defunded by the Public Utilities Commission. And that presented quite a few challenges. There was a legal response. We filed a request for injunctive relief with the Superior Court in conjunction with some of the contractors and the affected housing authorities and those that utilize the programs in New Hampshire. And there was also motions for rehearing and reconsideration in the original docket. And that all had happened as a result of more than a year delay in the approval of a plan for 2021 to 2023. So it was a very frustrating time, obviously a very difficult time for energy efficiency contractors, for ratepayers utilizing the program. It was a true mess. And so in order to solve that, we ran out our legal recourse options. Nothing was working. We had a really strong media response. And then we ended up taking a bill that was retained in 2021, House Bill 549, and revamping it in January of 2022 into something that was a compromise across all sorts of different stakeholder groups and amenable to all parties. And that bill ended up setting the energy efficiency funding in New Hampshire to 2020 levels. It did effectively get rid of our Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, or EERS. And that was a disappointment to a lot of clean energy advocates, but this does provide some stability in the programs. They will be increased every year based on the 3-year average of the Consumer Price Index, which is a marker of inflation, and a 0.25% adder. And it creates some guardrails around the public utilities process of approving plans in a timely manner. And so there has been one hiccup so far. The 2022 to 2023 abbreviated plan was approved in May. But a key portion of that approval was the inclusion of the requirement that 65% of electricity savings, as calculated on an annual and lifetime basis, come from that electric category. So House Bill 549 had made no such distinction. The PUC interpreted the statute, their information that way. And historically, the savings have been calculated on only an annual basis, and that presents some challenges in serving fuel diverse programs and weatherization. And so we're really concerned about that. And that might be an item of interest to keep an eye on in 2023 in the legislature. More broadly, we tracked about 50 energy bills this session across a wide variety of topics. It was a good year for defense. We were totally in person this session, which presented itself with challenges at times. And, most legislation that we saw was either amended or changed in some fashion by the end of the year. I will also mention that 2023 is going to look a lot different. In New Hampshire, we're losing 7 of our 24 Senate members. They're choosing not to return for various reasons, including our Senate president. And the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee is going to see a lot of turnover on the Democratic side. Several of the long-serving members of that committee are not returning as well. And so that's a loss of institutional knowledge. And so we're going to have to be really keenly aware of what's going on in 2023. So with that, I will switch to the next slide, please. So going back to that playing defense model, that's really what we spent the bulk of the year doing. We had a couple of really concerning net metering bills, the first of which was House Bill 1599. And as submitted, this would have removed the cost of RPS compliance from the net metering credit for a select group of projects, those projects operating in the 1 to 5 megawatt category under the expanded group net metering allowability. This would be a relatively small reduction, and there was some back and forth on this because that issue of rough justice with the net metering tariff. Some advocates supported this change because generators in this category also sell RECs, and that creates a bit of a double dipping problem if they're also getting credit of the RPS. So the bill was amended to study whether or not to remove the cost of RPS from the credit, and if we should be including credit for other things such as avoided transmission, distribution, capacity costs, grid services, etc. So that was a win, a good compromise on that bill, and a bit of an olive branch to the House side from the Senate. And then the more severe of the 2 net metering bills, House Bill 1629, this would have reduced the net metering credit to about wholesale, a major reduction, about 80% in value. And it would have undermined the settlement agreement in the 2016 docket that determined our current net metering credit. And a big reason that this bill ended up failing and dying in the Senate was that we are expecting out of that 2016 docket a value of distributed energy resources study. And this will vastly inform whether or not any cost shifting is occurring as a result of net metering and whether or not our net metering credit should change at all. So we expect another net metering docket to be the end result of that study, but this legislation was pushed off and killed in the Senate because we didn't have that information, and it was supposedly at the ready. It was originally due in March, then the Department of Energy in New Hampshire got a delay until May, and we still have not seen the study. It is hopefully going to come out in some form tomorrow. The PUC ended up issuing a procedural order in that docket requesting the Department of Energy submit something by the 5th of August. And so we will see whether or not the department heeds that request. Next, we have House Bill 614, which was another routine bill from 2021. And this would have removed, or would have exempted rather, the state and municipalities from the cost of compliance with the RPS on their monthly electric bills. We felt this would have undermined the RPS, would have created a lot of new utility billing costs, and it would have reduced the overall funding available in already pretty meager renewable energy fund. This bill was ultimately sent to interim study because of those anticipated utility billing costs being too onerous. And so we could see this crop up again in the fall, but I'm hopeful that that will not be the case. Next, we have House Bill 1459, which would have established a requirement for solar installers in New Hampshire to submit recycling plans for those panels to the Department of Environmental Services, and would have had them liable for following the take back and recycling guidelines in those plans. The fine associated with this was pretty steep. There would have been a $10,000 fine for every unit sold in violation, and that would have been done by 2028. As an organization, we felt this was pretty premature. There would be, a pretty severe burden on the installers to get all that together and to comply with it. And it would essentially depress the existing market for solar with new costs that would be passed on to the customer, and it would be really onerous to implement. We felt that there needed to be some more stakeholder involvement in how this could be implemented in the future in a more reasonable manner. I mean, certainly recycling of these materials is an important issue and something we should consider. But we do have time to study this issue. The majority of our small scale PV in New Hampshire is not near the end of its useful lifetime. So in terms of what happened that was sort of good this year in New Hampshire, we have to look for the glimmers of sun where we can get them. Senate Bill 262 ended up passing with only 2 of the original 4 sections. The first 2 sections of the bill that did not pass would have had some slight expansions for net metering. Those were met with stalwart opposition on the House side, and they did not progress. It was a little bit more favorable on the Senate side, but couldn't find a compromise there. So what this bill ended up doing was that it resolved some existing provisions within the New Hampshire law that prevented an existing customer generator from participating in a group net metering project, even though their electricity consumption may far exceed their on-site generation. And so that was a nice cleanup item. The bill also established a process at the Department of Energy to start investigating matters related to the process and the cost of interconnection for customer generators, which has been a big area of focus as there's been some hiccups, especially with one of the certain utilities in New Hampshire. Notably, this bill also requires utilities to file hosting capacity maps by 2023, which has been a big request of especially the solar industry, but other distributed energy resources in New Hampshire. Next, we have Senate Bill 270, which was another bit of a cleanup bill, a small incremental progress item. And this provides and addresses some struggles with customer acquisition in the low and moderate income community solar realm. And so right now, developers who go after these projects are required to acquire customers and then income verify them. That can be a really challenging task. That verification has to occur annually. And so what this bill does is it creates an alternative process that can either be used instead of this process with the developer, and it directs the Department of Energy to consult the utilities and their electric assistance program list and to find an easier way to identify those eligible customers and to enroll them in those community solar projects. So that was a nice element of progress for New Hampshire. Next, we have a very small expansion of the municipal group net metering opportunities in New Hampshire. Originally, there had been a couple bills on the Senate side that would have allowed housing authorities, University System of New Hampshire and the community colleges, and Pease Development Authority to participate in the 1 to 5 megawatt group net metering for municipalities. Those ended up failing. What did end up sticking in a later bill, and it was amended into House Bill 1258, is that the state of New Hampshire can now participate in that expanded group net metering. So that's a small increase. I know it's really helped our small hydro in the state. And so I know there's a group underway that's attempting to pull some of those state accounts into a group net metering. Finally, here we have Senate Bill 321, which is a little bit of a market-driven niche solution for New Hampshire, which establishes a pilot to expand intrastate generation. Generation that is only in New Hampshire and not leaving New Hampshire between 1 and 5 megawatts. And then that generator would have a contract to sell power to an in-state entity. This pilot will have to be approved by the PUC, will likely take place up in Lebanon. And it's important to note these projects won't net meter, they won't act as an ISO generation asset, and they won't participate in FERC markets. And finally, we had some real struggles with EV legislation. We had 2 really incremental small bills, one that would have established an EV school bus pilot with no more than 5 buses, and the other would have established a dedicated fund at the Department of Transportation to capture federal funds, grant monies, other donations into a fund that would support electric vehicle adoption and infrastructure. No state funds at all. Both of these bills ended up being sent to the House floor without recommendation, and they were both tabled. So that was a frustrating situation. There's a lot of misinformation churning in New Hampshire about EVs, and so that will be a big focus for us for 2023 to do some education, some outreach, and to find some policy solutions that will work to support the EV adoption in New Hampshire. So with that, I would be happy to turn it over to the next speaker, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks for your work this session. I remember at the beginning of the session, the mood was much lower than it was at the end. So great work. With that, I want to turn it to NECEC's own Greg Ohadama to cover Rhode Island. Greg, take us away.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Ohadama. I'm the Policy Associate with NECEC. I'll be covering Rhode Island. It was a big productive year in the Ocean State, in which we actually made some national coverage. NECEC was vital for the passage of some key legislation during this past session. And throughout it all, we were able to track about 30 bills this session, ranging from the Renewable Energy Standard to solar siting, to offshore wind, and labor standards. Next slide, please. So in 2022, NECEC was able to hold its first in-person Clean Energy Day since the start of the pandemic at the Rhode Island State House. And with the number of members in attendance, NECEC was able to set up several meetings with Rhode Island legislators and also have a McKee administration roundtable. So I'd like to point out a few of the notable legislators that we met with, which include the Senate President, Chair Oyer of the Senate Committee of Environmental and Agriculture, Chair Sosnowski of the Senate Committee of Commerce, Chair Bennett of the House Committee of Environment and Natural Resources, and Chair Solomon of the House Committee of Corporations. NECEC also participated in a roundtable discussion with our very own Jeremy McDermott and Dan Bosley, talking to the Rhode Island Senate.
So to respond to that guy's questions, I don't know about the price per kilowatt hour.
Mike,
cap. No clue.
Mike, I think you're off
STEP
mute.
projects are awarded to the lowest bidders, but there's preference given for like EV communities
Are we
and I think landfills.
able to mute
as well.
Mike?
But as far as the price, I have no clue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to continue to say that Jeremy and Dan were able to talk to the Rhode Island Senate about the need for urgent climate action and the job development
Eversource
and economic opportunities that come with climate change and mitigation resiliency efforts.
Yeah.
So the NECEC policy team spent quite a lot of time at the Rhode Island State House, and we testified on a number of bills which can be seen here. And NECEC was also an active convener, meeting with various organizations and advocacy groups on many of our top bills this session. Next slide, please. So here are some of the key bills that passed. First, I'd like to start off with the Offshore Wind Procurement Bill. That passed this session with NECEC staff in attendance at the bill signing. So this bill allows Rhode Island to mandate its EDC, which is now Rhode Island Energy, to procure 600 to 1,000 megawatts of offshore wind. It also made some changes to the remuneration. And this legislation was one of our priority bills and was really seen as a complementary piece to the 100% Renewable Energy Standard, or RES. NECEC was heavily involved in trying to get this bill across the finish line, in which we wrote a letter to the Speaker, as well as signed on to efforts that was led by Green Energy Consumers Alliance, which is a member organization. The labor standards in renewable energy projects was also passed this session, in which NECEC got involved in this bill by providing feedback to the proponents. And the sub-A, which was passed, ultimately lessened the impacts of labor standards that would have hurt project development. Another key bill that was passed was the Solar Disclosure Bill, in which NECEC provided feedback and voiced concerns about certain provisions to the House and Senate staff, in which we ended up minimizing the cancellation period from a lengthy 90 days to 45 days. And last but not least, the 100% Renewable Energy Standard Bill, which was NECEC's top priority this session, and also had NECEC staff at the signing, This bill assures that Rhode Island electric supply is renewable by 2033. Originally, the date was, or the year was 2030. But thanks to remarks made by the speaker during our Clean Energy Day, we were able to find an immutable year to work with and get it passed. Next slide. So what's next for Rhode Island? So the Ocean State, we were really trying to get solar siting and program expansion to pass this session, but unfortunately that didn't happen. We were actually had this as one of our priority bills, and we're hoping to tackle the expansion of REG. And NECEC couldn't actually support this at first as it was written, but after meeting with proponents, we were able to work out some of the issues in terms of the conservation protection areas. And we're going to continue to work with these proponents, which are primarily environmental advocates, and actually have a lot of meetings planned as it is for this coming fall. And just like last year, energy storage is still on the horizon for Rhode Island. NECEC brought forth an energy storage bill that was introduced by Senator Hoyer, and that as well didn't make it across the finish line due to concerns by the PUC. And NECEC looks to address some of these concerns and try again next session. And as for transportation and interconnection, which are also in the foreseeable future for Rhode Island, we hope that that's going to be coming soon. And after the death of TCI, another way to tackle the transportation sector is desperately needed. NECEC was supportive of the Electric Transportation Act that ended up stalling out, but believe it has a future, especially given some of our recent work with the EPA hearing in terms of granting California's waiver in full, in which we actually provided both oral and written testimony. We hope that some of these waivers could be adopted in Rhode Island. And as for interconnection, which is an issue across New England, NECEC is committed to working and staying involved in conversations, and hope to get something done in the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Really exciting session, Rhode Island, seeing a lot of our top priority bills pass. Thank you for that. I'm sure we'll get some questions. Next, I want to turn it to Jonathan Dowds at Renewable Energy Vermont. Jonathan.
Thank you. It was a year of modest but important victories here in Vermont that we're hoping are going to set the stage for a more dramatic effort in the 2023-2024 legislative session with some potentially bigger wins. From a climate perspective, the biggest thing on the agenda this year was our Appropriations Bill. It was notable that climate was the top priority for much of the federal dollars that came down in response to COVID relief and stimulus, et cetera. So this bill was very strong on supporting electric vehicles, both in terms of vehicle purchases and EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure, terrific on weatherization for low and middle income Vermonters. Also included money for electrical systems upgrades for those households, which lays the groundwork for heat pumps for electric vehicles, for integration of renewables. So all of this is really terrific. And had some good targeted dollars towards municipalities to help them switch to energy efficient heating and cooling systems. But it did have a limited direct impact on clean energy directly, and it is all one-time funding. These were not programs that were set up with a continuing support. It was $200 million that went to these various efforts, which I realize is not a big number in some of our neighboring states, but the largest climate investment we'd had previously was $30 million. So this is a big deal in Vermont. And weatherization was the top item on that with $80 million there. Next slide, please. We had 3 bills that made some modest improvements in the environment here in Vermont for the development of renewables and for the climate in general. All 3 of these bills, I will say, are bills that Rev testified in favor of, both in the House and the Senate. The first was H518, which is a municipal building energy efficiency / resilience bill. It included technical assistance for rural municipal buildings to look at things like solar, siting, weatherization, and storage, and a $36 million grant program to directly support those transitions. So targeted but important, raises the visibility of these technologies, which is great, and helps our rural municipalities save money on their energy costs in the long run. The city of Burlington in 2021 passed a proposed charter change that would allow the city to assess a fee on carbon emissions in the thermal sector. This change passed with a pretty strong 60-40 vote in Burlington, and then needed to be approved by the legislature, which it was. Right now, this is primarily targeted at new construction, but the actual language of the change actually allows fees to be assessed to any system. So this is to incentivize switching from fossil fuels to renewables in the thermal sector. Burlington is the largest city here in Vermont, and it's great to see some local action there. And we hope that other jurisdictions in the state will follow suit, and in fact, that the state itself will. We'd also just note that Vermont passed an environmental justice bill. It was one of only 8 states without such a bill previously. And Rev worked with the Senate Appropriations Committee to make sure that that was adequately funded. So these were, as I said, some incremental improvements. We're proud of all of them, and we're looking forward to some bigger things next year. Next slide. So what didn't pass? Well, the clean heat standard was probably the biggest item on the legislative agenda this year. That was H715. This came out of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which created the Vermont Climate Council, which in turn created the Vermont Climate Action Plan that was released in December of last year. And the biggest item in that, the biggest suggested legislative action was the creation of a clean heat standard. Our sense at the beginning of the legislative session was that this would be a 2-session process. There's a lot of complexity here. It would have created a credit trading system for the thermal sector, a bit analogous to what is happening under our renewable energy standard. Ultimately, since it came primarily out of that climate action plan, I don't think that there was the level of broad-based public support and understanding necessary to get something this complex over the finish line. The environmental community was divided on this bill. There were some concerns about double counting and whether or not it would lead to real climate reductions or simply some paper savings. Because of some of those concerns around double counting and its actual efficacy, Rev sat out this bill. We were neutral on it. Some of our environmental allies were for it, some were opposed. It did pass through both the House and the Senate. It was vetoed by the governor, and that veto was sustained by a single vote in the House. Vermont House has 150 members. 100 members are needed to override. 100 members had voted to pass the bill, and immediately prior to the override vote, one member changed their position on that, so it only received 99 of the 100 votes it needed to overturn that bill. As I said, this bill really took up a lot of the legislative oxygen as far as climate initiatives went, and really stressed the legislature to address something this big and this complex this quickly. It remains to be seen whether this will be picked up again in the next legislative session. I don't know if there's the appetite for that. Obviously, the thermal sector is very important from a climate perspective, and seeing electrification there and seeing that cleaned up is important. But we're having some record retirements this year from the legislature, including one of the main champions of that standard. So it's really TBD whether or not that will come back next year. There were also 2 bills introduced to revise Vermont's renewable energy standard. Our standard currently requires 75% renewable energy by 2032. But what I'll note that's very different from our New England peers is that there's no vintage requirements on that. So currently a lot of the renewable energy that meets that standard comes from pre-existing hydro facilities, a lot of it Hydro-Quebec. And so there are real serious concerns about whether that's really creating any additionality, whether that is driving changes in greenhouse gas emissions regionally, or whether Vermont is simply claiming credit for renewable energy that's pre-existing. So the first bill that was introduced on this, or one of the bills that was introduced on this, S264, moved that target to 100% renewables by 2030. Excuse me, I'm doing this the opposite order here. S232 would have moved that to 100% renewables by 2030, but not added any vintage requirements, would have kept the same minimal additionality requirements. Rev was adamantly opposed to this bill. And so we helped to ensure that that one would not see the light of day. And in fact, it did not. We worked instead with the President Pro Tem of the Senate to introduce S264, which had that same 100% renewables requirement with a 25% in-state renewable requirement, strong requirements for additionality, and limits on the size of the hydro facilities that could participate. Given the lift to get our legislators up to speed about the additionality issues and the complexity here, our intention with this bill, or our expectation for this bill, was never that it would pass. Certainly we would have taken it if it did, but really this is to plant a flag for what we want to see in the next legislative session. And so to give a glimpse forward, that is our primary focus next year. We really need to redo Vermont's renewable energy standard. Is that a step with what's gone on in the other New England states as far as the requirements for additionality, the size of the projects that can participate? So making sure that that happens, so that Vermont is truly doing its part on the renewable energy front, instead of simply claiming credit on there, is our top priority, and something that we're hopeful that we can get good progress on. Alongside that, we'll also be looking at some permitting and regulatory reform to make it so that good projects can predictably and quickly receive their certificates of public good and go into production. So that's all the news that's fit to print up here in Vermont. As I said, we had some important wins. I think we've really laid the groundwork next year for a big push on this renewable energy standard, which in our minds is the biggest single thing that we can do to continue to make climate progress in Vermont.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Really exciting to hear that you've laid the groundwork for next session, and I'm sure that we will all be working together on that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. With that, I want to turn to our last presenter before Q&A. So start thinking of those questions if you haven't already. We have Deb Peck-Kelleher from ACE New York. Deb.
Thanks so much. Thanks for including us over here on the west side of New England. So the Alliance for Clean Energy New York is a member-driven association of energy, industry, and environmental interests that we work together to promote clean energy technologies in the state. We focus on renewable energy, transportation electrification, energy efficiency, and more. So we held 2 very successful virtual advocacy days on energy efficiency and another one on transportation electrification in February and March. And then when COVID started to recede, we held an in-person advocacy day at the state capitol focused on large-scale renewable issues. So we had a wonderful reception that was very well attended, and with our signature cocktail, the ACE, too. So it was nice to get back together with everyone. And we also testified at the transportation budget hearing in support of the zero emission vehicle school buses, the proposal the governor had, and in support of the direct sales of EVs in New York. And recently we testified in the Assembly hearing on the role of public authorities in meeting our state renewable energy goals in our state's climate law. So next slide. Thanks. So we have a number of large-scale renewable bills that we worked on this year. Some we were working for and some we were working against. But the one that we were pushing for that saw a little bit of movement, we're hopeful for next year, was a Senate Bill 3277A, and this would offer a state sales tax exemption on the purchase and installation of residential or commercial energy storage equipment. And we also saw a number of bills dealing with agriculture and solar. So Senate Bill 7861A, it would direct the Department of Ag and Markets, working with the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, NYSERDA, to develop and produce guidance and educational materials for farmers on the use of ag voltaics in farming. So this bill has passed both houses and is waiting to go to the governor. Senate Bill 7027 is a bill that we've worked on for a number of years. It did pass the Senate this year, and it would set a maximum price for tier 2 renewables in our state, and those are the legacy renewables that either were hydro that's been around for a while, or those that already had a contract that the contract's expired to sell their renewable energy credits to NYSERDA. And there were a number of bills that ACE had concerns with because of their possible effects on renewable energy projects. And because this is a new industry and a very complex industry, we saw a number of bills that misunderstood the current law and how energy is produced and transmitted in our state. So a lot of our work was actually educating the legislature on how the current energy market functions and how transmission occurs. So Senate Bill 8088 would create a pilot program for solar projects that are under 10 megawatts to maintain their agricultural assessment in New York State. You get a reduced property tax assessment if you are meet certain standards for agricultural production. And this would require farms with solar to receive approval from Ag and Markets and to have a conservation plan and an Ag environmental management plan. The bill was drafted what we thought was with a confusing intent. So we did end up opposing the bill as it was written. We do believe that solar projects can meet the current requirements for ag production numbers for ag assessment, that if they can meet them, that they should be able to get the ag assessment without having to go back to Ag and Markets every time to get approval for that, because that doesn't happen with other sectors. Senate Bill 8889A would place the current NYSERDA mitigation fee that's assessed on projects that win a bid for renewable energy credit for the development of wind and solar. There's a mitigation fee for based on how much of your project encompasses viable agricultural lands. And this bill would place that currently collected fee into a fund to be used only for farmland preservation. Originally, we opposed the original draft of the bill because it appeared that it would create a new fee and not redirect the existing fee. Once again, there was a misunderstanding of how currently things are done with the regulations and laws in our state. Senate Bill 8384, which would allow utilities to construct and own renewable generation projects and dedicate the revenues to low-income customers and bill credits. We have real concerns with this bill. Con Ed in New York City is one of the larger utilities that's pushing this bill. And we do know that utilities just cannot construct and operate renewables at a comparable price to independent companies. And we believe that ratepayers should not have to bear this additional cost when the renewable energy companies can create the projects and build them cheaper. And then another bill that saw a lot of action and political controversy at the end of session, Senate Bill 6453C. It did end up passing the Senate, and this is what the Assembly held a hearing on last week. And this is an expansive bill that would allow the New York Power Authority to own and operate renewable generation, in addition to modifying the Power Authority's board structure, and it would offer reduced price power to low and moderate income New Yorkers. And it would rearrange how NYPA functions and how public utilities and public power operates in New York State. So we support the intent of the bill to meet our climate goals, but there are serious issues that would slow down renewable development. And the bill does not address any of what we feel are the issues facing the renewable development in our state. Can I have the next slide? We had a huge win for the climate and energy efficiency this year. The governor put forward, and then it was finally put forward this in her budget, and then it was done as a standalone bill after the budget was finished. Senate Bill 9405 would strengthen our state's energy and building code and expand the type of appliances and products that need to meet energy efficiency standards. It updates the energy code by allowing the Code Council to determine code exceptions. And then it also changed the life cycle cost analysis. So it includes climate emissions in that analysis, changed the time frame. Before, everything was a 10-year life cycle. Regardless, your roof and your walls are going to last way more than 10 years, but those were always 10 years in the cost calculations. So it modified those calculations. It placed NYSERDA, our state agency with the most background and information on energy efficiency and building construction, on the Codes Council. And it was so important to get it signed this year, or right after it was signed, in July, our state entered our 3-year process to update our energy code. So now, as soon as the new code comes out in 3 years, it will be this updated energy code, and it will just move us towards more energy efficiency in buildings and new construction and rehab, and then also move us towards all electric buildings. The bill also expanded the list of appliance and products that need to meet state energy efficiency standards, was just a huge win for consumers. $1.5 billion saved in the next 5 years by consumers with those energy efficiency standards. So that was huge. An additional bill that moved and was signed into law also in July was Senate Bill 9422, and this directs the Public Service Commission to develop a new regulatory structure for utility thermal energy networks for building electrification. This would allow utilities to create pilot programs for loop networks. And these are things that in New York State we're going to need to do to electrify dense urban spaces that we have. Next slide. And in terms of transportation electrification, we also had a huge win with the governor's budget, Senate Bill 8006C Part B, which requires school districts to purchase, lease, or contract for only zero-emission buses by 2027. And by 2035, all school bus fleets, commercially owned or by school districts, need to be ZEVs. School districts will be offered a one-time waiver if the bus they need for certain needs is not available on the market. And it allows ZEV buses electricity or the hydrogen for and charging and fueling stations to receive state aid. Right now, if you put in an electric bus, you would get state aid for your diesel bus, but diesel fuel, but you wouldn't get it for electricity. So that was modified too. The bill has labor and Buy American provisions, extended the lease terms for lease buses, which is about 50% of our bus fleet in the state, from 5 years to 12 years to make the leases more cost effective. NYSERDA will offer technical assistance and is in the process of preparing a ZEV bus roadmap, which should be coming out in September. And then in a separate part of the budget, we do have a state bond act, environmental bond act before the voters this fall. That bond contains $500 million set aside for bus purchases. The bond does need to go before the voters. And another bill that we worked on, Senate Bill 1763, did not move out of the Transportation Committee in either house, but we feel it's just very important to keep working on this. And this would allow the direct sales of electric vehicles in our state without going through a franchise model, which is what a lot of the new electric car companies are doing, is non-franchised. In our state, there's only 5 locations where people can sell EVs. All those 5 location certificates are all held by Tesla, so the newcomers aren't able to directly sell into our state, which is very unfortunate. And I personally feel is holding us back on ZEV adoption in the state. Another bill, Senate Bill 8518A, would prohibit homeowner associations from restricting EV charging infrastructure. This bill's passed both houses and is waiting to go for the governor. And that is it from New York State. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Deb. At this point, I'm going to invite each of the panelists and presenters to turn on their camera as we begin the Q&A session here. I wanted to thank everyone first for being here and doing these presentations, and for all your work this session. I think what we saw through these presentations is that there was a lot of work to make a lot of progress this session, and that's thanks to all the folks on this call. So thank you. The second thing I wanted to thank folks for is for being right on time. I don't know if we've ever been right on time in Legislative Roundup history, so we have plenty of time for Q&A now. And so one more plug to put that in the Q&A if you would like to have your question answered. But I will kick us off. And I think one thing that's been really interesting this year is that many states have unprecedented funding to spend, be it through ARPA or through just general fund revenue, and wondering how your states are spending that money with respect to, or considering spending that money with respect to clean energy and climate, if at all.
Well, I can take a stab at that, Sean. But before I do, I just, you read these slides. And as I was reading the slides in my presentation, I knew something was off. Storage hours, 4,800 hours. It's 4,800 gigawatt hours. That should answer the question of that. We'll correct that slide before this goes out. We have one of the questions that came along. The governor had sent our climate change bill back, and he wanted a bunch of changes. And one of the things that he wanted was he insisted on spending $750 million out of ARPA funding. That was one of the amendments that he had sent back. The House and Senate rejected that amendment, but they pointed out, and I have to say, Chairman Roy was very eloquent about this on the floor, listing off all the spending. There has been ARPA money, there's been bonding money, and there has been just general revenue money, because we have more general revenue than we know what to do with it this year. And a lot of that money has gone into climate change to the tune of not $750 million. But if you add all of those things up, including what I expect will come out of the economic development bill, it's over $3 billion. It's about $3.1 billion that's been spent or allocated by the state this year. And I think it's important that most of that has been allocated for physical infrastructure. So for resiliency and hardening our infrastructure, for seawalls, for climate, for EV charge stations, because we know that there's a certain amount of that money that's ARPA money that won't be there next year, the year after. And so once we spend that money, you can't bake that into a budget for going forward. So I think they've been very intelligent about how they're doing this. And they did spend just, I think the technical term is a boatload of money this year.
Thanks.
Yeah, and as I highlighted in my presentation in Vermont, a lot of that money did pass through to climate. Our boats are a bit smaller, but weatherization was a big recipient, vehicle electrification, some money for a switch and save program to install heat pumps for low-income Vermonters. A lot of it was targeted to low and moderate income Vermonters to help with some of the equity issues involved with the energy transition, which I think is a really good decision. I think it's a morally good decision and a politically smart decision as well. And then investments in that municipal resiliency as well. So a lot of that money did ultimately go to climate issues, though not directly to renewables or procurement.
Yeah, I'll jump in with some numbers for Maine. Dan Burgess and the Governor's Energy Office has been administering a lot of this new funding and doing a really nice job. I have some slides on this that I could be happy to share, but 55 million in Maine formula funding for energy related programs includes 18 million in new programming, 30 plus million for low income weatherization, and some smaller amount for clean energy job creation, possibly the creation of a clean energy jobs board or something like that. And then a final thing to highlight is an energy efficiency revolving loan fund capitalization. So I think some of this money will find its way into our newly enacted green bank structure, which is good news.
Great. Thank you all. And one thing that was really interesting from each of your answers is I think you each mentioned that at least a portion of the funding is going towards low income. And it seems like there's been a recognition over the last year that the clean energy industry needs to step up on equity and EJ issues. I'm interested in hearing from each of you what equity issues remain to be addressed, and how do you see the legislature playing a role in addressing those issues in clean energy?
So this has been a big issue in Vermont, especially with respect to the net metering program and whether or not that provides a cost shift that harms people who aren't able to participate in that program. What we at REV would like to see is we'd like to see much more aggressive spending available to make those programs available to low-income residents so that they can get those benefits rather than slowing down deployment for folks on different parts of the income spectrum. Delaware just launched a pilot where they're going to put panels on roofs for low-income families. I'd love to see that replicated. We want to make sure people aren't left out. Let's give them the benefits directly.
Yeah, and in New York State, our climate law requires 35 to 40% of the benefits go to disadvantaged communities. So our state is still defining what is a disadvantaged community, and the comments on that close, I think, tomorrow. But NYSERDA and other state agencies have already taken the steps to move forward to modify and change programs right after the climate law was passed, to start to reach those 35% goals. So, and the Public Service Commission has approved some utility programs to modify the community solar programs to make sure that low and moderate income folks can access community solar with a more automatic registration for those programs rather than having to, certify their eligibility and to go through the work like that. In addition, we've also, the state agencies at NYSERDA and the utilities are working directly to modify energy efficiency programs to make sure that the monies are targeted to low and moderate income residents in our state, to make sure that, as they face the energy burdens, that they also can get the energy efficiency programs that the state is running too.
Great. Yeah, it seems like a theme running through both of those is ease of access and making it easier for people to qualify for these programs and to access them. That makes a lot of sense.
Sean, I think a lot of programs that we have are for low income, low and moderate income, or low income. There's a mindset that it's an urban or suburban issue, but it's also a rural issue, and it's a farm issue. And I don't think we have really focused on that. And I think that if you bring this right back to the very beginning of how the system works, you've got to be able to plug and unplug. And many places in our states, I know in Maine and Massachusetts, pretty much in all of our states, we have areas that have single phase power. And without three-phase power, we're not going to be able to modernize our electric systems. And so when you get into rural areas where there's a crying need for more electric vehicles and more transportation, we just don't have the infrastructure to do that. And so if you peel it back to, kind of job one, if you really want to serve low and moderate income, then you've got to give them the tools so that they can plug in.
Dan, I think you hit on a really interesting point there, that New England and New York are, heavily differentiated between the urban and rural areas, and very different needs for both of those markets. And I think that there's nowhere that's more relevant or evident than in clean transportation. And we have a question in the Q&A about what the barriers are to accelerate the adoption of zero emissions vehicles. And wondering if folks can speak to that. And maybe Greg, I'll turn it to you first on what can be done there.
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier is the affordability, and trying to make that easier by way of rebates or such matter as incentives towards that. And I know that was one of the things that was a part of the Electric Transportation Act, and not just talking about electric vehicles, but e-bikes as well.
I can jump in here since New Hampshire seems to have a plethora of barriers at times. I think especially in New Hampshire, rebates are a political non-starter here. And so we're excited to see what might happen at the federal level for some support in that area. I think there's also going to be a big focus on the infrastructure opportunity that we have with the federal funding and the NEVI program, and being able to bring the Department of Transportation along and understanding the implications of EVs. This is a new subject material for them. And so coming at it from an education perspective and providing resources and connecting stakeholders is a big part of what we've been working on. In absence of state level policy change, we've coalesced a group called Drive Electric New Hampshire, a group of stakeholders, utilities, tourism folks who are getting really interested in this, because if you look at the map, New Hampshire has very little charging as compared to our neighbors. So trying to use more of that grassroots movement to educate, to do some outreach, and then to hopefully find some consensus on policy down the road.
The thing I'll add is the development of the used car market is going to be very important here too, right? We need to have enough vehicles in the fleet that people who are primarily buyers of used vehicles can access electric vehicles. It's going to take some time. That's going to take some of the barriers on the front end being eliminated, so the fleet size grows. But it is important as we look to get to like 100% electrified.
Yeah, I'll highlight in Maine that we do have a used EV rebate structure of up to, I believe it's $4,000 coming from the Efficiency Maine Trust. Obviously, it's hard to find a used EV. I did do it though, and it is possible. So I think that Maine has Efficiency Maine Trust has done a really nice job with that. I note a question from Sarah Simon in the Q&A, which is related about regional collaboration, and I expect that's probably an opportunity to on EV policy. I don't think there's too much of that going on. I am allowed to cross the borders, I guess, with my EV, but I don't know how much the policy is crossing the borders.
Thanks, Marty, and thanks for teeing up the next question there. But I also think that you're right, both Jonathan and Marty, that the used car market will help to address Greg's affordability point and make that more accessible for folks. Though the used car market is quite tight, even on internal combustion engines right now.
Yeah, my used EV is actually worth more than I paid for it when I bought it used a couple of years ago. It's crazy, as I'm sure people know. But it's you've had offers. It's odd.
Who knew a car would be an appreciating investment? And then I guess Kelly, your point on federal as well was really well taken. And I think as we drill down the regional level, getting to Sarah's question in the Q&A, how if at all are your states considering regional grid efforts or transportation collaboration in new legislation that can work together across state lines, as this is at least in New England a regional issue with ISO New England?
I can jump in and say from New Hampshire's perspective, we just got our 10-year energy strategy updated this summer. And there was kind of a stark reminder of the politics of New Hampshire and a statement within that strategy saying that New Hampshire will not be on the line for any sort of regional grid investment and paying for that or participating in it. So that's something that we're going to work on, is opening up that mindset and seeing what solutions might be there for some grid investment that would benefit the region.
Yeah, I think we tried a regional transportation approach, and that didn't seem to work because we couldn't get enough members in it. Although there were some that stepped up, and I think that, you know, at some point we will probably revisit that again. But I think it's absolutely essential, given the fact that we're all in, well, all the New England states are in ISO, and then of course New York. I'm out here in the Berkshires. We get power from New York whenever we run low here. We just, you know, I think we run extension cords. ISO runs extension cords over to Albany, but we need to. It's absolutely essential for us to tap into each other's planning. We really need regional planning on transmission. Transmission is, again, I go back to the very beginning. If you can't plug into a grid, then all of this is for naught. And, you know, when 20 years ago, when I did electric restructuring, we had 56 power plants throughout New England. And if one spun down, another one would spin up. Today, we have hundreds of thousands of generators, every solar panel, every wind turbine. You know, go up in the upstate New York in the Shadow Gay and those communities, and there are dozens upon dozens of wind turbines. We need to be able to tap into all of that. And so we need that regional transmission system to be able to do that. It's the only way this works. And so we just need to get everybody on the same page.
Thanks, Dan. And since you're talking about the climate bill, which did have that piece on participating with other jurisdictions on clean energy procurements, we've got the question I was waiting for in the chat on whether Governor Baker will sign the bill. I'm not going to make you put the betting odds on that, but wondering what's next if he signs it, and what's next if he vetoes. And if you are open to prognosticating, you can feel free to do so.
Yeah, my optimistic self says that he signs this. I don't know that he has any choice. But then again, 2 years ago, he vetoed the roadmap bill, and we had to come back in February of this biennium and redo the roadmap bill. I think that I wish everybody had heard Chairman Roy on the floor when they accepted a compromise from the governor. He laid out why they didn't do certain things and why they did certain things. And in parts of this bill that he sent back were just sort of, the administration wants to do things as opposed to legislative interference. And, you know, how do you handle that? It's sort of, you know, interbranch squabble. I hope that he signs it. I hope that he takes it. And he's leaving office at the end of this year. This can be his legacy. And if you look at where he has been as our, you know, very moderate Republican governor, he's really pushed the envelope on a lot of this climate change. So I'm feeling he will probably take his compromise and sign it. If he doesn't sign it, the legislature is out of formal sessions. So one legislator can stop anything from happening at this point. If he vetoes it, it's dead for the year, and we're going to have to come back in January. And I hope not, because there's a bunch of other things that we've got on our list to do in January and the rest of in the next biennium. If he doesn't sign it, in Massachusetts, it's quirky. If he doesn't sign it now, because we're still in session and we haven't ended the session, then it becomes law without his signature. If this was the end of the year and we didn't have 10 days, he could pocket veto, but he can't do that. It becomes law over the without his signature. So we'll see what happens. I'm hoping he signs it.
Great, thanks, Dan. And you with the turnover of administration in Massachusetts, Ross, you actually talked a little bit about the turnover in Connecticut in the legislature, and wondering what your take is on whether this new legislature will be able to pick up where this current one leaves off, or if there will be a lot of education to do.
Yeah, especially on the energy side of things. I mean, I think there's been a few names that have been floated, especially for the new House chair. As everyone knows, the current House chair of Energy, David Arcani, is leaving the legislature, not running for re-election. A few names have been floated. It could be any one of them or someone completely different. Frankly, it's just kind of a crapshoot at this point. Typically with this committee, they generally will put someone there that has had experience on the committee before because the subject matter is so dense. I think if it's any one of those people that have had experience, I think that would be fine in terms of the leadership level, and the rank and file typically will kind of get behind the chairs. So as long as the chairs are in a good spot, I'm not sure how much more. I think they'll largely be able to pick up where they left off. On the Republican side, the Senate Republican ranking member is leaving. There just aren't very many of them in the state. I think we've got like 13 right now, Senate Republicans in the state. One's leaving, and they actually might lose seats in the state. So we might get someone brand new there that kind of doesn't know. So I mean that would be useful. Mike, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
I just say, I mean, as Ross mentioned, the energy is a very complex issue. There aren't a whole lot of people, clamoring to get on the Energy and Technology Committee in Connecticut. And of those, there aren't a whole lot that have real deep knowledge. I think they're well-intentioned, but don't really have the deep knowledge. And they tend to look to the chairs, I think, for guidance.
Great. Thank you both. Greg, Rhode Island adopted the 100% renewable energy standard by 2033, which is one of, if not the most ambitious timelines for renewable energy in the country. What does the state need to do next to not only meet, but to maintain that 100% renewable energy standard?
Yeah, good question. I think the state just needs to continue to make sure that renewable energy resources could connect and get onto the grid, especially when we're thinking about the decarbonization of our heating and transportation sectors. That's going to be very important to make sure that we're able to cover all of that.
Great, thank you. And I see we have a hand raised. Maria, are we able to let Lisa speak? Lisa, you're up if you want to ask your question verbally. If not, we will move on. Going once.
Sean, I'll just jump in with something funny. I was just at an event with Governor Mills, the Governor of Maine, of course, and she has been spending a lot of time with Governor Charlie Baker, as referenced by Dan. And as many here know, probably everybody here knows, in Maine, we just turned down the New England Clean Energy Connect, the other NECEC, because it would only be good for Massachusetts. And so Janet Mills said she was pushing Charlie Baker on the compressor station that would be good for Maine natural gas. And I guess he said, well, people think it would only be good for Maine.
Well, Marty, that actually you've opened yourself up to a line of questioning from me, so I'm gonna take that opportunity. And with the, or I guess what distinguishes the current Northern Maine RFP from the New England Clean Energy Connect project, and do you see there being enough difference to allow the Northern Maine RFP to be successful, where the New England Clean Energy Connect, not NECEC, project has not been successful?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think two things. There have been a lot of lessons learned. I think as far as stakeholder engagement, I think people working on developing that project have taken a really ground up approach, and they're really listening and digging in those Northern Maine communities. And Aroostook County is extremely large, but I think there's also, as we say in Maine, the county, it's a different attitude. And I think I'm essentially a Southern Maine guy, and people in the county would say, that's just northern Massachusetts. No. There's a positive attitude, and there have been some renewable projects there that have done very well, and I think it's cast things in a good light. And there are some very can-do representatives and senators coming out of that section of Maine too, and that's kind of just a tradition. So I think all of those things are aligning pretty well, and so positive vibes from what I can tell, and a real opportunity for Maine. I think that we in Maine will sometimes shoot ourselves in the foot and not put things together that really could be good for us, and I think this is one. So I'd like to see it move ahead, and I think there are some leaders coming out of there, as I mentioned, and Senator Trey Stewart is one, and then Senator Jackson, of course, as well, and then obviously Susan Collins is from up that way. So there's a lot of moving parts that there's a can-do attitude in Aroostook County that I think is really going to help.
Great, thanks, Marty. I think we have time for two more questions here, so I'm going to ask two of the whole group. The first one you can choose whether to answer. The second one I'm gonna make you answer. The first one, it's an election year, and I'm not going to ask you to predict the results, but what are you watching for, and what's really of interest, and will impact the next legislative session?
Well, I can start in Connecticut. We don't think there's going to be much. There's going to be several new members, probably over 30. But I don't think the numbers are going to change very much. Right now, the Ds are control both the House and Senate by wide margins, and I don't think that's going to change very much. And I also think that that Ned Lamont is going to be reelected. So I think the land of steady habits is going to continue its steady habits.
Yeah, the expectation here in Vermont is that the governor, Phil Scott, is very likely to be reelected, and therefore there's a lot of interest in whether or not the Democrats and progressives together can maintain a large enough majority in the House to override a veto. This year, they were right at that magic number, and there are a number of seats that are losing, particularly strong candidates who are well suited to those areas. So whether or not that coalition can hit the 100 seat threshold again is something we'll be watching closely.
I'd say in New Hampshire, it's pretty likely that we're almost certain, rather, Governor Sununu will have another term. I think the biggest thing to watch for in New Hampshire is exactly how extreme the Republican Party ends up going, especially in primary season and things like that. We have something called the Free State Movement in New Hampshire, which is like a step past libertarianism. And they have had an outsized influence in a lot of the policy decisions in the last year. And so if they continue to gain control of the Republican Party, I'd be a little bit more concerned about, clean energy goals for the next year. But we've also seen some indications that they might be scaling back a little bit in terms of support. So that's probably the key indicator in New Hampshire.
I would say in New York, all the state offices are held by Democrats, both houses are controlled by Democrats, and I expect that to be the same in this year's election. The things I would be looking at to see is our governor, Kathy Hochul, was lieutenant governor, and she assumed the governorship, so this will be her first election before the voters. To see how much of a mandate she has. She's all in on climate, so I'm hoping that she'll have a large enough mandate then that she can take us a lot further in New York on climate. And also we have a very active progressive democratic socialist movement in New York City and some of our upstate cities. So to see, and they primaried some assembly members. We have Senate primaries coming up in a couple weeks to see whether they win those Senate primaries and how many seats in the end they end up holding in the legislature.
Great, thank you. Exciting few months to come in each of the states. Well, I want to end us on a high note. And I'm going to ask this of each of you in order. and just a few words on it, but what excites you most about next session? And I'm just going to go in the order of my screen and start with Deb.
Excites us most. I think that it would be more work on electric vehicles in our state as we really start to drive that, not necessarily legislatively, but administratively. We have some rate cases going and some setting of rates for EV charging, which will expand the industry that way. I'm excited to see that. And we will see a lot more of our large-scale renewable projects actually get constructed and come online. We have 106 large-scale renewable projects going to be putting power on the grid in the next year or two. So that'll be very exciting in New York.
That's quite exciting. Great to hear. Dan, you're up next.
Well, I think it depends on whether the governor signs the bill or not. I could be excited about doing all this again. I think there's a couple of different things. I think we cracked the door this year on green buildings. And there was a piece in the economic development bill that was on low embodied building materials in construction. And I think that gives us an opportunity to look at low carbon cement and some other things that gets us into buildings. We need to be able to green our buildings. And so that's one thing that excites me. The second thing is I think we have to take another run at one of the oldest forms of renewable energy we have. We have all these small hydro plants. Right now, they're prohibited from using the RPS and getting into storage on site or off site. They have to do it on site. So I think there are some things that we can do that are the next step to bring more clean energy online and bring it online in entirely different ways with EVs and with buildings.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Greg.
Yeah, I mean, with the passage of 100% RES, I think Rhode Island has a lot to look forward to, but I would say kickstarting the energy storage industry in Rhode Island, given that energy storage is critical to meeting and sustaining the state's ambitious goals, it's going to be very needed. And I'm looking forward to working on that energy storage bill coming next session.
Awesome. Thank you. Jonathan.
We're excited to follow Greg and New Hampshire, Rhode Island, excuse me. Taking another crack at the renewable energy standard is definitely what we're most excited about. Our renewable energy standard was passed in 2016, and many states in New England have updated since then, even though that was only 6 years ago. It's an already ancient history in climate policy. So getting that all the way up to 100, addressing the additionality issues so that we're really making sure we're building new renewables, and including a storage requirement in that are all things that we think we have a real shot at during this next session, 23-24, and are really excited to dig in on.
A lot to look forward to. Thanks, Jonathan. Kelly.
I think on the legislative side for New Hampshire, I'm most excited about what we can do on EVs, mostly because that coalition that we've convened is diverse and influential. And so I'm really excited to see what will come out of that group as a recommendation. In terms of more of a regulatory lens, if I can go down that road, New Hampshire has really had an opportunity to shine in terms of community power or community choice aggregation. And we just had those rules approved at the end of July. And so hopefully the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rulemaking will approve them as well. And those programs can get up off the ground in 2023. And so that will really give more local choice about where energy is sourced, how it's competitively priced, and is really an area in which New Hampshire has, taken the bull by the horns.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. Ross.
Well, first and foremost, hopefully being back in person for the duration of session and having an in-person clean energy day next year. On the policy side, curious to see what the hydro task force comes out with. And then also we're hoping, even though the champion of the bill is leaving, Will Haskell, but we're hoping that the EV direct sales bill will be back. And, given the makeup of some new members coming in, might be able to push that a little further this upcoming year.
Great. Thank you. And Marty.
Geez, I get to bat cleanup. Thank you. Yeah, I want to put in a plug for doing business here in Maine. We've got a really good structure here and numerous successful projects and very aggressive storage goals in particular. Our energy market is probably the smallest on the screen. I think we use somewhere around 2,000 megawatts. We have a 400 megawatt storage goal. by 2030. We have aggressive EV goals. So I think, you know, the solar coaster, I think is sort of leveling out here in Maine, and we're getting better at it. I do think that there's a good chance we're headed to divided government, which will mean, you know, maybe policy that is, you know, the sharp edges are off it is the best thing that has a chance to advance. So if I could spin that positively, which I think I can, we can build more successful projects here and, you know, build more successful startups here. So come on up to Maine.
Thanks, Marty. Well, thank you everyone again for this great panel. And I think for all your work in doing what Marty just said, helping to get projects built and get us to our climate goals. So would ask everybody, even if off screen, to please join me in a virtual round of applause for the panel here. Thank you all. Well, thanks everyone. And Maria, can we put up the, yes, this exactly. Also wanted to flag some events from the esteemed panelists, including the Renewable Energy Vermont conference, the annual conference scheduled for October 27th and 28th. Clean Energy New Hampshire's annual Local Energy Solutions Conference, October 14th. You can make a Northern New England tour in October. Then ACE New York's Renewable Energy and Jobs virtual tour on August 17th. And you can just shoot over to Maine right after that to get to E2 Tech's summer networking event at Geary Brewing, also on August 17th. Each of the respective websites for these organizations has the upcoming events. So please check them out. They are bound to be great events. Once again, thank you panel for being here, and thank you for taking the time. I want to turn it to Joe for the closing remarks.
Yeah, and Sean, I'm actually going to turn right back to you in 1 second because I think it's well deserved. I thank you for everyone who participated today, our panelists, but for everyone who's been an important partner and ally and stakeholder in this ecosystem. I hope everyone can agree that we have an incredible lineup of collaboration amongst all those who are trying to advance policy in the region. I want to thank them all for that. But this is one more shout out. Please join me. Well deserved, Sean. Not only do you do an impeccable job facilitating meetings, I won't miss that. You've done an incredible job in advancing. I've been admiring all the impacts we've had, and you've been in the mix of it. I'm going to hand it back to you one time to goodbye, but here's one more round of applause from me verbally to you on behalf of everyone. The floor is yours, and thanks everyone for participating.
Thank you, Joe. I won't take more of everyone's time since we're at time here, but I have really appreciated the almost 3 years of work that we've done here together. And it's been really great learning experience, great to work with everybody. I think we've taken a lot of huge wins as well. So it makes me feel really good about our time here. But you're not getting rid of me that quickly as I am going to an NECEC member company. Couldn't leave the ecosystem. So thank you, Joe, and thank you everybody for everything over the last few years.
Here's to the ecosystem.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone. And thank you all for members and everybody for joining the Legislative Roundup. I hope we have a great one again next year. Thanks all.
Take care.